As we talked about team-based learning and groups dynamics, we also incorporate that with scenario-based learning, and it really shows a lot of promise from several studies. And when you utilize community identification and risks and behaviors, local leaders and educators, the level of understanding and response to first aid issues can be increased. Remember, the makeup of your course is going to be very dynamic. And so you have to require people to use some personal accountability and responsibility. And it may be uncomfortable for those who are used to taking traditional courses and memorizing content to pass it. There's also a social nature of pedagogy that complicates learning because of multiple stimuli, and it also mimics a more realistic environment for first aid. Peer-to-peer learning allows more diversity of teaching in this course. So we need to think about how we are going to help people process, how we're going to coach people and facilitate groups that are floundering. Another key element to this course is stress inoculation. Stress inoculation helps prepare somebody for an actual response at some point. So this comes out of the military, and also seen in lots of other areas, law enforcement, fire, etc. It's where we emphasize the process of the developing emergency by identifying risks and mitigating those to the victim and responder. Participants can leave with an increased awareness of the limitations of themselves and self-efficacy and higher self-esteem. If we do it correctly, we'll help them through the three phases: the conceptual phase, the skill acquisition and rehearsal phase, and the application and follow-through phase. This is both social and individual learning at its best, but it needs to be facilitated coherently through an affective and cognitive steps. So how do we reflect on these post-scenarios is going to be hugely important, but also how do we set it up with the scenarios and moulage, etc. So using the moulage and staging scenarios to create heightened emotional states and cognitive challenges needs to be scaffolded and purposeful with the content. Again, we look at the beginning of the course and we look at conceptual. What is that worst case scenario? How do we understand that? Where do we have an emergency? Who creates the emergency? Who helps resolve the emergency? Those are all conceptual pieces that need to be identified. Then as we get into the course and we build on these several times, is the skill acquisition. That happens in our mini lectures, that happens in our skill demonstrations. Then it also happens during the scenarios. And finally, as each scenario sort of brings it all together, that's their time for application and the follow-through phase, where we stress them out as best we can, allowing them to learn but not be overwhelmed. That's again that distress versus eustress. So stress inoculation is pretty important to this course. Make sure you have it in your mind and scaffold it within the